No, you're at the mercy of evidence. It could be that future evidence will show that when I say that any genetic gap between the races is negligible, that as we learn more and more and we learn about the human genome, I think it would be remarkable if we came up with a conclusion that more than 2 or 3 points was genetic. And as I say, the difference between twins and singletons is 4 points, and no one runs around fighting in the streets over that. You remember I published stuff that shows that blacks have gained 5 points and whites over one generation. And it's no longer 15, it's nearer 10. And if that happens another generation, these people are going to have a lot less to argue about, aren't they? I mean, if blacks ever cut the IQ gap to 5 points, how much time are we going to waste on them?
You make an important point that people have to accept the IQ gap as it was measured in, say, 1971 and also in 2008, but then think that the closing of the gap was essentially unreal and almost an artifact or something.
Well, between 72 and 2002, blacks not only gained 5 points on IQ, they gained the equivalent of 5 points on the relevant tests to advance educationally in America. I mean, that's far more significant. I mean, the significant thing is, are blacks crippled in some way of making use of education? And then you can get into a huge fight about whether it's genes. But the real progress we want to see is in terms of black achievement. And over that period, they behaved as if they were 5 points brighter at the end of that period than they were at the beginning of it. And behaving that way is all that's important. Not that the IQ tests and the achievement tests didn't tally. It would have been surprising if they didn't.
Well, I mean, the most common criticism of the IQ tests, and this is in relation to Charles Murray's findings with the bell curve, with the IQ tests.
Well, remember that Murray is very guarded.
Yes.
He will never come out and say that the IQ gap between black and white is dramatic. Perhaps you heard the 2 debates I had with Murray.
Yes, I did.
That have been on that. And, well, you can always say, he says that the gap will never close. It's a little obscure to me why he's so sure it will never close if blacks are not genetically inferior. Unless, quite rightly, he has a pretty dim view of the future of the black environment in America.
I've heard him say that his most compelling argument, I thought, was that if you've got a gap and a difference in mean, because there's a tremendous amount of overlap between the two distributions, which most people don't talk about, but a difference in mean that's significant, that what are the chances that those groups would differ at a population level, that it wouldn't be to some degree genetic and some degree environmental. Now, I've always believed it was environmental. But
yes. Now, of course, it makes a difference to the degree. If you really thought 50 years ago with Jensen that even Jensen didn't say all 15 points were genetic. He said about 10 or 12. And that makes a big difference than my saying that we might eventually be bullied into thinking it was 3. And I don't say we're going to be bullied into that for them. I'm just saying that as blacks gain, this whole debate will be of less practical significance.
Right. Well, we should talk about some of the issues with the tests as well. In terms of, I think one of the factors, or one of the most important factors, is that you've got the largest population that the norms are based on are white populations, Europeans, and that's where every other population is compared to. But the issue...
They always say to that, how come the Chinese have done so well?
Yes.
If it's all based on whites, how come the Chinese beat us at our own game?
Well, that wasn't my point. My point was that there's a difficulty in terms of, assigning groups, ethnic groups, like Hispanics, because Hispanic people come from multiple different cultures, multiple different geographic regions, and then calling that one particular ethnic group to some extent, and that's taking the language of the postmodernists, that is a social construct.
Yes.
Yeah.
But remember, as Thomas Sowell has pointed out, almost every black in Chicago is not much interested in the fact that the IQ test may be pro-white in the sense that his kids would have better genes for surviving in tropical Africa. They're very unlikely to go to tropical Africa. He wants his kids to have better genes or equal genes for progressing in the American school system.
Yes.
And this is why I react so strongly against people who talk about a Pakeha school system or a white school system. It's a cosmopolitan school system throughout the world, which, if it has any virtue, is that it's a measure of academic achievement.
Well,
now, if you want to say, I mean, Irish have made their peace. My father was an intelligent man, believe me. And he had a Chinese friend across him when he worked for the government. And he would stay on and work extra, and I think I probably advanced faster than my father. And my father was, I want to go home and argue politics at the pub. I'm willing to pay the price of having a slightly less income because I don't want to live the life American Chinese live.
Yes.
But then you have to be willing to pay the price.
Right.
Maori in New Zealand are having trouble coming to terms with a school system which has not been designed to favor Pakeha over Maori,
Yes.
but has been designed to measure how much you can advance in a modern industrial society. Now, if every Maori said, oh, well, I don't mind paying the price of greater unemployment, and I don't mind the price of worse housing, and that's not nearly as important as being more relaxed and more empathetic, fine. But you can't have it both ways. You can't say, our subculture makes us more relaxed about schooling, and isn't it amazing that we've fallen behind in social statistics?
Well, I guess my point was really more that intelligence tests to some extent are measuring modernity of thinking, and that is developed through your interaction with the environment. I'm not more intelligent really than my grandfather. I just have to interact with a different environment. Like my grandfather's not, or my great-grandfather's not intellectually disabled. It's just that they're interacting with a different environment.
100 years of social progress over your grandfather. Now, that doesn't mean that it follows logically that white Americans today have an advantage of 50 years of social progress over blacks. You have to make it a more sophisticated study than that.